Welcome to another Timeless Education group meeting. And today we're going to talk about what the different functions of the energy types are in the human species. Something that we talked a little bit about, whether or not enlightenment should also incorporate understanding other people's nature in our first conversation. And so I figured we would continue and go into that topic today. Just to introduce for those who perhaps are a little bit new to this, in Timeless Education, we use a typology that divide people into three fundamental types and also 9 more specific types or primary types, and beyond that also more specific configurations, 81 specific configurations. But this topic, this idea of how, because this is related to how to organize society, because society tends to be very partial to certain energies. And I don't know if people are familiar with people like Dr. K, who runs the YouTube channel Healthy Gamer. He is an Indian guy, a fiducian, if you are familiar with my typology. And he is pretty good. And sometimes he even brings up he uses a typology from India, which is called Ayurveda, which divides people into the 3 types called Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing them correctly. And he often brings up that our Western society is very oriented towards Pitta and motivation when talking about being motivated to like work and engage in society. And this is how he briefly describes them, that Vata tends to be very dynamic minds that are drawn to all kinds of things, ADHD-like, changes interests quickly and often, and they need to rotate what they work with, and that they learn fast but also quickly forgets. And then Pitta then is directed and steady and is more what people associate with Western motivation, being motivated and driven, hyper-focused on one thing, and that we erroneously define having motivation as this style. And they change interest or direction after some years, so not so often. And these people have to be careful not to burn out. And then the 3rd type, Kapha or Kapha, it tends to be slow, steady, and unchanging, and almost never changes interests or direction, and learns slowly but tends to remember what they've learned. And this kind of, this is something that you could perhaps correlate to the 3 main or fundamental types that I often talk about. Obviously, many typologies tend to be similar because they often draw upon the same sources and influences, often the 4 classical elements. And I think it's the same here, that like Vata is associated with air, and Pitta perhaps with fire, and Kapha with earth. And since they also only have 3, that makes it tempting to like try to make correlations when there are an equal number of types. But I'm not sure in this case that one could correlate this exactly with the spheres then that I refer to as sapientiam, gratum, and morem in the typology that I refer to as energy bias. But yeah, he doesn't really talk about functions. There's not a lot of philosophy per se. It's more like, he brings up this problem that people are basically different in their nature, and some are more standardized and looked upon as the norm, and other people become more pathologized, that they need to like adapt and make themselves into other types of people than they were actually born to be. But I'm thinking, but there is not much philosophy that goes into more existential reasons, like why are these types the way they are, and does that mean we should he doesn't really talk much about how to organize society or how perhaps it was meant to be. But I figured we would get into that eventually. But we should perhaps also start from the idea of like functions, or like what are the usefulnesses of these energies. And we could perhaps then start with the 3 fundamental energies, if any of you want to comment on that. What do you think of what I've said so far?
Yeah. Was that
Let's
my voice? I think it's
Frank, you can start.
Yeah, well, I think that all of these energies are necessary, and they to build. If you look at the society as a whole body, then the unchanging, more vital types are necessary to keep the more basic structures in place and cannot compromise their course. And the more exploratory ADHD, like, is necessary to bring in new information, and like, I think that they're all necessary when and to be partial to one of them would tend to be a mistake. But as you say, in order for you to understand how you should make every category represented correctly, first we need to understand why it isn't so already, and yeah, that's what I spontaneously came up with now.
Yeah, I don't know, because what you said earlier about this guy's model, I guess he uses, I don't think it does go too well with the I mean, you can recognize some of it in Sapientium more, but I don't think it's represented in the same way. Like when, for example, the morum, steady, unchanging. This is where I think of configurations, but not even the configurations. But it's not just it wasn't just steady and unchangeable in motivation. It's also steady and like unchangeable and like not being too like when I think of corpus types, for example, they're not too curious or like open-minded in like new things or anything like that. It's more of like enduring and just doing like simple routine things and not letting things get in the way. And then for Meritum, it's more of like a standard they follow or something, but it's connected with cultural norms and stuff like that. And then they sort of like, they don't like, I guess they adapt to the norms, but then it's like, yeah, they strive to be on top when it comes to those norms.
Yeah, those norms that tends to promote positive change and like building up a high society. You could say that they are the implementers of the new ideas, Meritum a little bit. So like today, the idea is to make global sustainability in the environment, and then the Meritums, think, oh yes, like enthusiastically wanting to implement these ideas and push them on people. So it's yeah, like since they are a reflection of the Sapientium sphere, they are interested in. They are not necessarily conservative. They can be progressive, but it's very action oriented.
One-sided.
One-sided, and yeah.
And then, like, even when I think of Exidium types, they're more like, I guess, not even drawn towards, but they're more focused on their own interests and desires. It's so much of a care for what society thinks or what other people want, which is kind of like Meritum too, but with Exidium, it's more what they want. So it's more of a rebellious kind of thing. That's why I think they get
Exidium is very easily bored, and I've seen Dr. K talk with certain people who were one of them was Sasha Gray, who I think is an Exidium, and if not an Exidium, she is a libidinum, so that's not Sapientium. So I mean, it could also be like the left or right side of my model, you could think, but even that doesn't really fit well. So yeah, it doesn't really, it doesn't correlate exactly, and I don't think it's nuanced enough to really that you can really overlay it that precisely onto this typology. But that's the way with all typologies. But I'm wondering if you guys know of any other typologies that talks about like certain types as functions, or that certain types are normalized and related to this topic.
Yeah, I can especially like speak on that since I've been like in both sides of the spectrum in terms of like sociocultural like development. And for example, in these days, I feel like Meritum and Urbanum types have given this skewed idea of mental health, where like certain problems or behaviors are like considered pathology, even when they are not. Like Excidium types usually are stigmatized as psychopathic or narcissistic, and Misericordum types as being too sickly or weak or making too many excuses, for example. Yeah.
Yeah, but I was thinking more of like other typologies. My question was whether or not how does other typologies like do any typologies really go into this question or this topic a lot? I don't know. I haven't been that much into them.
Well, I remember seeing like a old interview with Carl Jung before, and he was talking about how basically the human being is the problem, and it's our psychology that we need to understand. I think he thought that understanding our psychology and like how people differ and the different types is going to be necessary for structuring like a healthy society in some kind of way. So I think of like when Carl Jung was coming up with his theory of psychological types and stuff like that, I have a feeling he was sort of thinking in that direction, like understanding that people are different in these kinds of ways are going to be important for having a healthy society and healthy relationships between human beings in general. So
have you guys heard of the Enneagrams?
The Enneagram, I know a lot about it. The Enneagram doesn't really get to the topic into what function each type serves into a societal scale, but it does give some vague ideas, such as, for example, a lot of like type 7, for example, which is like a blend of libidinem and fiducian. It's about like bringing fun and exploration and freedom, I guess, for example, into the species.
I know, but the Myers-Briggs typology, which I also took, I think I'm ISTJ. The problems or the problem I have with it is just it's not very clear. It does not give a good structure of the theory behind Myers-Briggs, so that you can identify exactly why and how is a person as described. So you kind of like at school, it's like where you have to like memorize and know that such and such a person is ISTJ, EFNP, etc. But it doesn't give a background theory of how and why. You see.
Yeah, I mean, it all derives from Jung's original work, to my knowledge, and so it kind of waters down it to the workplace. So it already is working under like a set of assumed values. But I have also been immersed into the cognitive functions, and so, for example, introverted intuition is basically similar to the Sapientian sphere in its function about basically observing patterns over time and synthesizing them into ideals or more nuanced, higher forms of knowledge. TI also serves a similar function but it's more axiological, like magnitudinem. So yeah, Jung also gets into Gratum will be more like FE or extroverted feeling as well, because it's about the social graces and I guess the glue that keeps communities together, you can say. Yeah.
And it doesn't feel like the big five, if you should call that a typology, really addresses the problem of integration and representation of the different
It's a very statistical way of measuring like certain like traits of the types that might like be assigned different roles as well. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and both bioenergetics and the Enneagram tends to view the types as almost being created out of some mistake, some kind of pathological trauma or like fixation. I think that originally the types in the Enneagram were not exactly types, but more like fixations. I think in the model they were mentioned like passions, like anger, like they were based on the 7 deadly sins plus 2 more, and there was an like a correspondence of that in like the mental sphere or in the head. So there is a lot of that in those in more like spiritual typologies. But I thought I would but just mention and see what you think of these original sort of ideas that came to me in terms of what the main or fundamental types could represent. If you think that if you want to comment on something here or add something or question something. So I refer to the Sapientium types as wisdom types, and of course that's very broad. And like I have used the term educators, but educator is very like you can educate in some sense. The function of any type would be to inform some kind of knowledge, because just by observing how a type behaves, it should give you some insight about reality if we think of the types as reflecting various aspects of the universe. Yeah, Christian.
Yeah, when I think of the Sapientium types and how like I guess it differs from like other types and stuff like that, it's like I think of like the Gradum and Morum. It's not so much of like a questioning aspect, it's more of like an adapting kind of thing. So like the Sapientium types are really sort of like questioning and curious and like going out there and trying to sort of like go beyond and see what they can find. And then the Gradum types, when I think about the anxiety and stuff like that and how they want to please others and fit in, it's like depending on what they're attracted to and drawn towards, they adapt to it, and then they take that information and try it. If it's teaching, it's educating knowledge that's already been discovered, I guess. So then it's more adaptive, I guess, which differs from Sapientium in that they're trying to teach their own wisdom, maybe that they've discovered through wisdom they've taken in from outside, but they're dissatisfied with, and then go out to seek more, and then find something new and then give it to the culture. And then the other types are trying to adapt to it, I guess, and either teach it or maybe it's even rejection. Like it's like, oh, this is going against current norms and cultural values. You know, it's probably dumb and foolish. I'm not even gonna listen to it, I guess. Or there's no curiosity at all, basically. So I think that's how you can differ the different spheres between each other, I guess. But
yeah, I thought of something similar. I refer to the Sapientium sphere as spiritual education. I'm thinking of a spiritual education in the broad sense as essential or psychological, not just like religious education. And with the Gratum, I refer to them simply as social education, which is kind of similar to what you said. And then with the Morum types, I was thinking of something like practical survival education, like how to collect food or kill animals and like build a house, that kind of thing.
Well, also, well, yeah, I would think in modern days too, it'd be like how to do your taxes, or like how to keep a budget, or you know, what do you want in life? You know, what do you really want to go for? Go do
to
it.
make it
Like,
yeah.
It's more driven. I think it's more like that, especially for like I would think Maritum and Exidium types that have children. It's more like, what do you want and go get it. You know, don't sit around and do nothing. Like, do something. I guess that's how I would think of it. But
Yeah. I wrote some the way in which I will interpret it is that basically Sapientian types want to focus on novel or new ideas and the refinement into higher principles of knowledge, which serve as like the foundation that ensure like sustainability in our lifestyle or essentials in life, which can reach the political sphere once it contacts the Gradum sphere. And Gradum sphere sort of will spread the ideas more effectively, since like Sapientian types are more escapistic, so they want to teach things, but usually they're not the best at like reaching as many people, and that's kind of where the Gratum types are more suited for. And then Morem makes like gives like a physical foundation so that all the higher ideas and passions like can happen and not just like stay in the air, I guess. Yeah.
Well, I think, yeah, when it comes to Morum, I guess it becomes more routine. It becomes more locked in to the culture, and then it becomes.
That's
I have
the
noticed,
downside.
I don't know if you have noticed it, but I noticed that when I think back on like elementary school, most teachers were either libidinum or like meritum or corpus. But then when I came up to like gymnasium, which is high school in Europe, then there were a lot of fiduciam teachers and things like that. There was still some meritums, but it was, you could feel that there was a kind of difference. And then in art school you had also fiduciam, but also misericordam and things like that.
I think I had a few magnitudinum teachers in high school. Yeah, elementary school and like younger, yeah, I think of like libidinum. I don't know if maybe corpus too. I don't know if I had any meritum teachers in elementary school. I think of like principals and like administrators. Those seem more like the meritum sort of types. Like,
yeah. My experience, like the teachers for like little kids tend to be like corpus libidinum combos, because they usually like, especially the women, have like a natural drive towards taking care of children. So that's a way in which they, I guess, do it. And like meritum and corpus as well can be found in administration. Like I will say, yeah, my experience. Usually they have magnitudinem as well, so they can be more kind of like close in their way, so they can like do more things as so they don't have much time to really think in that sense. So they can be more strict, I guess. Yeah. And my father is a fiducian type, and he was a science teacher. He taught physics in Peruvian high schools, and also like will take his best students for science fairs. And my mom was also a biology teacher, but she wasn't really. It was just kind of like a job that she had to choose, and she will just teach it more conservatively, without really encouraging much like exploration. Really, just kind of what is on the curriculum. Yeah. So,
right.
Yeah.
So if I just go on with some of the other like functions. So with the Sapientium times, yeah, I think we've talked about conceptualizations, visions, inventions, questioning, philosophy, analysis, research, exchange of ideas. I think that one is worth mentioning. This verbal tendency that I think is a good way to identify fiduciam in particular. They love debates a lot, and there is something there like, language is part of the higher function of humanity compared to the animals. So it makes sense that at least one of the types in the Sapientium sphere would be very verbal. At first I thought
yeah,
that,
I think it's.
At first I
it's
thought
like
that
the
verbal
words
was more something that would fit like Gratum, because I was thinking of urbanums can be very eloquent, but I do think that perhaps the most talkative type is fiduciam. I mean, I could make an argument for that. Yeah, Christian.
Well, I think it depends on the content, or like what's because when it comes to Gratum types, I think they are verbal. It's just not with exploratory or sharing ideas or something like that. It's more gossip and talk about other people and maybe what's going to be happening the next day, or what's going on with their parents, or like their friends or something like that. Like it's more focused on people and what's going on in the environment versus knowledge and ideas and stuff like that. So yeah, I guess I would think the Gratum types are more verbal than the Sapientium types. And I think when it comes versus Fiducium, I would still say I think the Gratum types are probably more verbal than the probably than fiducium.
But
Yeah,
I'm thinking of people like Jordan B. Peterson, who is talking like I had such teachers similar to him who was just talking and talking and talking, and people like Stefan Molyneux who would interrupt constantly. And I don't know if you have seen Vaush.
Sorry,
that left-wing debater. A lot of debaters, I think, are fiducians. So I don't think you should dismiss the verbal tendency of because I mean, some of them are bullied. I've seen them be bullied, perhaps not bullied, but
I think Vaush has Excidium though. I think this makes it more verbal in general. Like I think Excidium increases other types' verbality a bit, I think, but also like the Gratum types I will say are more like they speak more things.
I disagree that the Excidium increases verbality. I think that the people on the left side under minus abstractum, libidinum, and corpus are more verbally challenged in some way. They are very impatient with talking. That is my impression, but yeah.
Oh, impatient with talking. Okay, yeah, that's different. Yeah, I know what you mean now.
Did you mean abstractum, libidinum, and excidium under minus instead of corpus, or you mean all four?
But corpus could also be kind of talkative now when I think of it.
But it's like it's more slow pace, and they don't like kind of want to talk too much or unnecessarily, I will say. And what I was thinking about this is that like Gratum types are more talkative, but they are more like frivolous, as in they will talk about like what's going on like with this YouTuber or this like celebrities or the people in their school, whereas like fiducian types will talk like they kind of like get lost in their own like train of thought, as in they aren't really like going back and forth with people's like emotional like affectations on things. Yeah, so it looks different even though they can talk just as much or even more.
Yeah, should we move on from the last thing I want to say about Sapientiam is also this idea with problematization, problematizing, being more sensitive and questioning things that are going on in society, which is often related to the desire to invent and improve things. But also problematization is also very much related to those types that are like suffering the most. So sometimes fiducium is not so understanding of problems, I feel like you have with magnitudinum and abstractum, and instead it's like misericordum tends to join in there a lot. They tend to bring up a lot of this problem with suffering, with too much suffering. But still, I think it belongs to the Sapientiam sphere a lot. So, but then we have the Gratum types, which I refer to as love types, or nicknamed as kind of entertainers. And again, just like educators, every sphere can be an entertainer. Like the Sapientiam types can entertain with like higher forms of art with like, I don't know, political messages or just things that
connected with philosophy or like philosophical ideas or
that's
religious
spread ideas,
values
combination
or something.
of art with ideas and questioning and challenging the viewer. And then you have the basic entertainment that you with people being frivolous and having fun and creating simply beautiful things and dressing up beautifully like beautiful women. That's more like Gratum entertainment, like dancing and things like that, or music. And then with I guess you can have like stuntmen and things in the Morum sphere. I mean, there's a lot of entertainment there as well. I know that a lot of out of the Morum types, I would probably say that Excidium likes video games the most. And so, there are more people who make video games who are Excidium than the other types. So,
really?
Yeah. I mean, it's not the most common type
Yeah,
of video games.
it's true.
But I've seen certain examples. I mean, it surprised me as well. But they like fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
It's
especially,
like, I will say the other two tend to be more like boring in terms of like what culturally people are considered, more.
very typically
in terms of-
typically adult.
Yeah.
I think what you talk about though that interests me is how you distinguish the spheres between each other. And I think when it comes to Kratom, it's the anxiety thing I think you're talking about that really distinguishes them between the other types and like the not necessarily desire, kind of like a desire to fit in, but worry about what other people think and whether they fit in and whether they're pleasing to other people and having other people's approval and stuff like that. I feel like that's very much like Kratom, like compared to Sapientium or Morum types, like more of that fear of being judged and of not fitting in and of not looking good or something like that. Yeah.
So would you replace like entertainers with something else instead of calling them like entertainer?
Well, I guess because I mean, like entertainer, yeah, I guess like because it would be, well, no, not really. I guess like it would be. I don't think it would be necessary. I guess, but I mean, it may be better. It's just, I guess, what could you replace it with? I would think of more like, because it's not necessarily like Mr. Cordum. I guess is. I think they're still anxious and worried about environment. It's just not much of adapting, I guess, like Urbanum would be.
Yeah.
So
I
I
agree.
think of it as like, I don't know. That's why I like when you talk about social anxious fear, or like so I think of it as like social types or something. Yeah, like anxious types, social types, but I feel like anxious types wouldn't
Relational.
be that great either. I don't know about relationships. More like, I don't know. All I could think of is social type, really. Over or entertainers, socialers. I don't know.
Yeah.
Probably not. So I don't know. Maybe entertainers is.
Bolelo, what do you think? You're one of the more typical Kratom types, like libidinum.
Yeah, I define them according to feelings. I call them feelings people. It's either you have misericordium on the left of the psychosis homomorphism, because misericordiums are concerned with how things feel, and they go into the deepest crevices of how things can be felt, and that is why then they can be able to explain or maybe to console somebody. And you have on the far right here libidinums. They want to go through all the tastes, and taste everything that can be tasted, and that is why they can then tell you what is it that you can go for if you need to enjoy life. And then in the middle they've got the benums. They want to feel part, so they do everything. I think they do everything they can so that they can feel like they belong. That is why they would dress according to whatever dress code there is, things like that. Even the speech is according to the lingo that's used in your locality, etc. So those are feelings people, I call them.
Yeah, I like that. I like the way you described that Mohelo. Yeah, I would.
But it's kind
I
of
would say
difficult. It's a bit difficult to tie feeling people to like a function. Like with the Sapientium types, you had like education. Education is something like where you can understand it as a function. And with Moram, you have like providers providing, basic necessities. But like, how would you think of feeling as a function in a kind of more practical sense?
I thought that it was about like the emotional glue that ensures that people have the authentic desire to stick together, so that human beings can form communities and care to support each other. I guess.
Is that more compass?
Could you think of it something like health? like the health
Yeah.
professions.
Yeah.
So you're saying, how can we think of feeling as like a basic, like a practical function or something like that?
Or
like
yeah, or
that.
how to tie it into certain institutions.
Yeah.
Well, I
Okay,
think
to those institutions that cater to people's emotional needs, I would say, then it would be what would you have? It would be parties and clubs and nightclubs, you know, on the far right. But things like
Yes.
maybe things like I'll say things like religion here with misericordiums, you know, where people can cry, you know, and cry and sing, you know, and get and cry their hearts out,
Really
you
crying
know.
personally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I would
Okay, I'm
advise
seeing
that.
parties on the far right and maybe something sad here on the left, or maybe something more, you know, I don't know
Yeah.
what to call it, like religion, I'd say.
It's kind of like
Yeah.
the thing about like both crying and like, I don't know, more positive festive events is that they kind of like bring people together in a way that's not bound by some like logic, like the sapientium types, like magnitudinem usually does, for example, but more like emotional, like, and I guess passionate or authentic, or more of like a not rational or reason to stick together that doesn't depend on some logic or some need to survive, I guess.
Well, I think of it like on that right side, it's more careless. It's kind of like,
Yes,
okay, we're not
it's
going
more
to worry about this or
short-sighted.
that. We're not gonna try to have things go a certain way. We're just gonna let it loose.
More
We're
short-sighted.
gonna go wild. We're gonna.
Because
So
data the Venom type that I initially thought was a different type, but he wants to give back to his
uninhibited.
community a lot and cares about it, but he's more hedonistic and emotional. So it feels like he kind of is just short-sighted to do it really. So it's kind of like they might want to, they just kind of have a more present moment nature that gets in the way of like urbanums that might become doctors or things like that. You know. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was thinking that religion originally tended to cover a lot of this. Like religion involved a kind of education, and it involved a kind of community and coming together with churches, like singing songs together, a sense of community, and which can be very healing if you fit in. I mean, the problem is that sometimes they are so rigid in their view that they tend to perhaps certain people might not feel included or like they are accepted, but in theory it's a good thing. And then of course also I guess religions included a practical thing as well. Can't think of one at the moment, but fasting, I think it had a health benefit, because if you eat constantly it can perhaps put a strain on your kidneys and things like that, and by not eating certain periods, I think it cleanses the body and things like that. So that's a kind of very practical, physical or bodily function of religions.
Well, I know a lot of people also like. I knew a couple people that did fasting, and they didn't even do it for eating purposes. They did it for like spiritual exercises and stuff like that. They thought like it would induce some type of experience or something, like if they fasted, kind of like how when people take psychedelics, they like experience like weird, unusual stuff. They thought that by fasting they would also experience like weird and unusual things.
Yeah, I think that's possible, because if you do any way you can do so that your body tires itself out, then apparently, I haven't really experimented with this myself, but apparently if you put a strain on the body enough, then you will start to see visions and things like that, similar to psychedelics. But one has to be a bit careful, I think.
But do you think?
Well, yeah, because you're putting yourself at the brink of like near death kind of experiences.
I actually experienced something close to what Andreas is saying. We were doing some exercises a couple of years ago, many years ago. So we were doing some exercises where we had to walk. I think we walk a distance of 50 kilometers overnight without food. Okay, this 50 kilos comes after 2 days of exercises and so on. So the morning, after I covered something like 45 kilometers, this is about 72 hours, after about 72 hours, 45 kilometers covered, all of a sudden I had voices from a distance. I had people talking, and I looked left and right because I definitely had people talking. Then I decided to myself, but let me just make sure if I can identify and see where the people are, only to discover that I was just hallucinating. There were no people there. I was walking through a forest, and definitely were no people there. But according to what I had, I thought there may have been a shopping complex nearby with people, or maybe a school, children playing outside. But that was all just there. There was nothing like that practically. So I agree that when you tire the body and the mind, you do get into something like that.
Interesting.
Going back to the question, do you think that the social sphere Gratum types could have something to do with, like, one, social cohesion, but also for bringing in values, different with emotion? Because if they didn't exist and there were only the intellectual and the Gratum sphere left, I think one way to think of it is like, okay, but what would be lost then in terms of societal health or like cohesion? Because if you remove them, then you could easily see what would be missing and then what you would need to get it back. Or
Yeah.
If I can get to
a type.
Well,
yeah, if you,
just hypothetically, if you removed all the emotional types, maybe you could figure out what practical function they fill by seeing what becomes lacking.
Well, I feel, yeah.
But if I can go into some of the things that I've written here about the social anxious types. So like providing care, perhaps there would be less providing care, like nurses or simply, things like that. I mean, there would still be with corpus, but it wouldn't be as emotional, and
well, there'd be less
effect.
love, I guess. Yeah, less care. Yeah.
I mean, empathy.
Yeah, I mean,
is
also has
very
some
big.
Gratum influence.
What did you say?
I was saying that, I mean, corpus in of itself also has Gratum influence. So if you remove like Gratum, you'll have to also remove magnitudinem and corpus and look at the other 4 types and see what's like really missing there.
Well, you'd have to remove all the configurations then, because everyone's a mixture of these. So you'd have to entirely remove, like you'd be removing human emotion in general. Like it would just be gone at that point.
So,
but I thought we were taking it in steps, saying we're only removing the Gratum sphere, and then just imagine without the Gratum sphere, what would you have then?
You would be removing the cross, I think. Like
No. I'm just removing the line, the middle line. The misericordiam, benam, and libidinem. Of course, you would have very dull people, no sense of fashion, no sense of style. You wouldn't have any parties.
That's a good
no
one.
fun. Life would be boring, and you would have all these buggers who don't have any feelings for people, and so that's the kind of life we would.
I guess. Oh, okay, I get it now. I like what I'm thinking is kind of like a heartfelt sense of tradition and values. That doesn't mean that we're going to be rigid, because that's influence of the more hemisphere with Gratum. So libidinem and corpus can be rigid about the traditions, but misericordem is not, for example. And urbanum is very flexible and malleable, for example. And magnitudinem can be rigid, but it's in a more like kind of escapistic way. So those are all the types that are influenced by Gratum, and fiducian, abstractum, for example, don't have this. I don't see this orientation towards like having a strong and heartfelt like values that they want other people to be on board with. And meritum is not heartfelt; it's more just like it's more rigid and one-sided. And Exidium, they use there's none of that there in that sense. Yeah.
Yeah, so affection, empathy, compassion. And I've also written enthusiasm. Do you guys agree with that?
Yeah,
That the Gratum
yeah,
types are more enthusiastic?
Yeah.
They can't talk and sit still, right? Yeah, I agree.
But I think though fiducium and meridum, they can be enthusiastic as well. But I don't know.
Yeah. And Exerium can be very passionate about certain things, but it's not really enthusiasm, but it's like more basic desire, or like, this is fun, this is crazy, I like this. I don't know. I mean,
Kind of like what I've noticed is that if someone has problems and they are around them, like they might want to ask a couple questions and see what's going on. And if they feel like the person is being too emotional or too neurotic and too uncooperative, they will quickly just drop, or like not in a harsh way, more so like, okay, yeah, you need help, and you just continue moving forward, as opposed to a Gratum type maybe likely to sit down and talk to them for longer. I've noticed that. I think investment in people when they are in very emotional situations is more of a Gratum orientation, I would say, as well. That fiducian and meritum don't really, like, they might listen, but I don't feel like they connect emotionally as easily. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I would take back what I said. I don't think you would be removing human emotion, I guess, if you were to eliminate all the Gratum influence or Gratum types. It would just be more the sensitivity, I guess. The more love in general, I guess, you would just be missing. Yeah, and I would agree with Andreas. I think the Gratum types are more enthusiastic, especially about what they're adapting to or what they're interested in or passionate about. That brings more enthusiasm in general. But I think fiducium can be pretty enthusiastic as well, and like ideas, what they found, what they want to share. So that may increase their verbal tendency in general, just more enthusiasm towards ideas and knowledge in general. So more verbal, more expressive.
They can flatter people a lot, also, I've noticed. Same with meritum. They can flatter certain people. And yeah, flattery is, I guess there's a bit of an idealistic aspect to that. Like, you are looking up at something that you want to strive for, and that's very much like idealistic, the idealistic sphere, or column. Yeah, I've written changeability, the ability to like change. I mean, you talked a little bit about that with Urbanum in adapting. Perhaps, I mean, yeah, fiducium can be kind of, they are not so rigid, but they are, yeah, they are not very conventional. They are always, at least mentally, in like their own world. They are always mentally independent. And of course, I wouldn't say that Exerium adapts much beyond what they are interested in themselves personally. And Meritum is also, like we have said, kind of rigid. And Abstractum is also rigid in the sense that they don't really have that much enthusiasm enough to adapt to things.
Well, yeah, one thing about Exenium that I think is interesting is how they kind of are kind of like loners in a way, but they don't really care that they are loners. Like, I feel like they don't mind it that much, and the thing, they're not too interested in like the complex ideas or anything like that. It's very simple. It's like most Exenium types I've seen in my experience are just hardworking, pretty like, just hardworking, normal dudes.
Like business oriented.
Yeah, that's
even
urban.
Yeah, sort of like that. And they don't mind. Yeah, they don't really mind much, like not having too many friends or many too much knowledge or information or anything like that. I guess it's very just simple.
Yeah, it's kind of like they just have a desire and they just chase it and don't really care about what people might think about those desires. They will still chase them, kind of. That's in general. Because with Urbanum, they can become like businessmen, entrepreneurs, or even world leaders. But with Misericordum, that might be more wild or crazy, and they don't really, I don't get a sense that they really want to change that or care if people think that it's not okay or they are too harsh or anything like that. Yeah. So yeah,
Yeah,
it's
so
kind of like a callous disregard for what people think about them or their desires.
yeah, so
Yeah.
speaking of the Morum types, then I refer to them as like custom types. And custom, this is like, yeah, a bit culturally habitual. And I like I said, I refer to them as providers, but also sometimes as kings and queens. Like if the Sapientium types are artists in the realm of like art, higher art, then yeah, Morum types are like the kings and queens that make society function in like that, like political sense that is too much for the more sensitive types. But that's also where we run into this problem with leaders who aren't really thinking very deeply and who aren't sensitive enough.
Yeah. I saw that problem with like when you explained when I noticed a problem with Vladimir Putin, for example, saying like there is this one-sidedness to Moran types when they are leaders, even if they are the most effective at taking like harsh action when when it needs to be taken without much thinking or much like guilt or any sort of impediment. I think that there should. I remember that there were some systems where the king will be more of an Exidium type, and then they will have like parliament or wise men that they are consulting with in order to make better decisions. And that's where those Sapientian types will be. As in, I remember I was thinking about what will be like if Jordan Peterson were to be a president, and then that, for example, and the problem will be that there are too many harsh decisions to be taken and too much action, and that will stress him out too much because of the sensitivity. But he will work very well as like advisor or someone that the leader can refer to for more informed decisions, I will say. But that requires maturity from both sides, of course, which is not always guaranteed.
Sorry. Even with advice, I just read the book Utopia by Thomas More, who lived in the 15th century, and he was considering joining the advisors for the king, but he was very opposed to the idea, since he thought that the king was surrounded with so many people that just agree with what he says anyway. So even if he's there, the king will not listen, and that was the problem with the philosophy king scenario at all. That the people that are more oriented to philosophy tend to be more rejecting authority and don't want to be close to authority, and the people that want to be in authority and want to be close to authority don't care so much about philosophy, and that was the main problem for Thomas More, that it seems to be like a conflict of interest between philosophy.
Yeah.
Well, I think this is a problem with like just having one or two people like ruling an entire area. Like this is where cooperation of types, like having an understanding of types, may be useful, because then you would understand people's different functions, and then you wouldn't have a government or society structured on leaders and powers and all that kind of stuff, but on different types and how everyone can contribute and support one another. Because I think that's the problem then you have with leaders being sort of rigid and narrow and closed-minded, because then they may be doing like destructive or taking destructive actions without caring for other people's new ideas or sensitivities and stuff like that. But then if you had multiple people like helping, like you probably wouldn't even need anymore. Like if you have multiple people that all understood each other, knew what they could provide and bring to other people, you probably wouldn't even need people to govern and world leaders, because everyone would know how everyone fits in, I guess, and functions. So you don't need people to have power over other people and tell them how to live life or how to do anything, really, because it's all sort of self-sustaining, I guess. That's how I would think of it. That's where I think of reciprocal maintenance in general. Like that's its main. That's what I think
Exactly.
if the understanding of it would do. But
I think it's exactly like you're thinking, Christian. I share the same sentiment. That I don't. Maybe I'm too idealistic, but I don't get it that we should have leaders as we have them today, because I think of society as a body. So you can't say that I is more important than everything else. Everybody is just part of the whole. I think if we can somehow get a larger section of the population somehow, I would say somehow educated, so that people know how we can all function for the better of society, other than
yeah,
relying on
Yeah, I mean,
this guy or that guy.
my opinion,
This
yeah, I
kings.
mean, I just want to say something quickly. I feel like societies are too big these days. I think like countries have millions of people that are just governed by one small group, and that's just not gonna work, in my opinion, for what Christian, because of the reasons that Christians was bringing, and you also in Bulelo. Like I feel like that's why it sounds. The problem with this idea is that it's not very realistic, but like the concept of communalism like comes to mind, as in just living in small communes where there is a leadership that has direct interaction with the people, and they aren't that big, usually at most in the hundreds, and because it's impossible for a leaders to be informed like properly about people when the country has like 10 million, 20 million population, you know.
yeah, I guess it just wouldn't be. I don't think it would be necessary if everyone were to understand one another and understand what they could give and provide, and
Yeah.
like everything would just function so nicely. I think that's how I would think of it hypothetically. But that's where I think of like that's why it's a part of enlightenment in general, because if part of enlightenment is understanding yourself, and you can't understand yourself without learning about other people in general, because you have to throughout life you're always going to be around other people, you're always going to be engaging with others and having to somewhat deal with people. So part of enlightenment or understanding yourself is going to include understanding other people, and then that's how people start to get stereotypes and categorize people and start to build that in their head. So understanding people, I feel like, is just it's just a part of human life in general. Like that's just part of the existence. So then, yeah, that's why I think part of enlightenment is understanding other people. If understanding yourself is a part of enlightenment, then they're connected with one another. You can't separate them, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, the issues that, like, as Andreas was saying before, is that sometimes people that are the most capable or caring about being enlightened are usually not going to be chosen into roles where they are, like, I mean, I know what you're saying, where there not doesn't need to be a leadership, but I feel like that the meritum and excidium tendencies, like they use, especially when dominant, it just sounds very, very difficult for me to see them fit into this idea fully. Like there will be always like some of them that are, at least some of them that won't like really like internalize that notion where that we need to understand everyone.
Yeah, but I also think that institutions are a part of the, like, when you have large institutions, even if it's a big company or something, and like, because one of the a part of the question was how should institutions be made so that they aren't partial, which they are at present, and then why are institutions, like, how are they built so that they are this partial, is the question we need to, like, understand first, I think.
Yeah, well, even institutions, I think before, as we identify that institutions are partial, I think we also need to ask, the question needs to be asked to say, what's the reason for these institutions to be set up in the first place? Is it
Exactly.
reasonable? Is it reasonable that
that
they be set up in the first place? I think by so doing, we're going back to how are they really necessary? And if they are, we could be sitting with institutions and trying to prep up and keep institutions standing for years, which institutions are actually basically useless. not
Yeah.
serving
Yeah,
us.
exactly.
You know?
I mean that.
So we need to get to that question
Yeah.
first. Do we need these institutions as they are? If not, what do we need then? So, because my whole thing about this whole thing of politics and is very different from what's happening today, because I think we can be more cooperative, and but this is also going to need that the other spheres. For instance, I think of abstract terms there, top right. I sometimes imagine that those guys are just pushed away, misunderstood, sitting quietly and hiding. We need to get them outed somehow so that they get to contribute to society in a way, because we'll only be healthier, I would say, when everyone is involved, when everyone's energies, is involved, and the body is working as it should. So,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I will bring back what I was saying before, but the problem is that I don't think it's like very realistic, but I will still say it because it might be possible down the line. Is that social structures or countries or communities at least in the broader sense of the word should be made smaller so that when there is so that leaders don't become detached into some institution and doesn't really know like what the needs of the people are, because there still needs to be because there are people that still need something to guide them, in my opinion, but that guide has to also care about them, because if he doesn't care, then you get like tyrants and you get the problems that we have now with institutions, basically, when they become removed or detached from the real needs of the people. Because and the problem, I believe that the origin of that is that populations are just too big, and even like local governments are too small for the amount of people that are there.
I hear you. But fundamentally, is there such a thing called a leader? Is there such? Or is it just a name invented and then attached to a person because of what they do? Is there such?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I agree with what you mean. Yeah, not necessarily a leader, more so just,
I
maybe
think there
someone.
Well, maybe some opinion. Oh no, my opinion is that there is no such. There is no such.
Okay.
Such that the world will be stuck if Christian is not there. That is not true. That doesn't exist. The world will move and things will happen whether Christian is there or not. So that is where I fail to understand the whole concept of leadership. Like, is a leader like the head of a train pulling a train? No, that's not how society functions. It doesn't function like a train being pulled. It functions like okay, I use the body again. It's one whole system that functions together. So maybe, okay, well, we will have to discuss this maybe sometime. The very concept of leaders. No, that's a function a person can perform, and if this leader is not there now, somebody else can do that. So I don't. Well, it's my opinion. I don't subscribe to the idea of leaders.
I understand. Yeah, I agree, because the vast majority of people we understand as as leaders. It's like there are people that don't really care about the other, just want the power for its own sake. I don't really care about the people that they are, making decisions in behalf of, and that's kind of the problem. That's why leadership fails so many times. And most leaders, like the vast majority, will have that orientation that you're describing in Bulelo. But there have been leaders that are just and fair and put their own egos they throw their egos out of the window. But that's just I don't know. I personally don't have that much faith on people for like really expect something like that to happen in reality. But it will be great and ideal. It's kind of the ego.
What about organizing? What about organizing society such that those leaders then they can go to the nearest forest, cut themselves a cave or something, and then stay there and do whatever they want? I mean,
exactly.
And then society can go ahead in the way that we can, because probably those will be Exitians who enjoy that anyway, and it should not be seen as a pathology. They want, and then we allow them to do that, and then society can go ahead. But I think what's most important for me would be some kind of education that opens up people's minds so that we can understand that We are this one whole body that functions together. If scientists want, how do those people in the first place get to be in positions where they're leaders? No.
Yeah, that's a good
For
question
me,
to be asked.
If they want, if they want to do what they want to do, they can be given that opportunity. There is space on planet Earth where they can go live alone and do their things the way that they want to do. Probably city-ups, which is okay. You know. But I think as society, we have a responsibility, which is more towards education. I think the first thing, that everyone gets educated and so that our minds are open.
Well, this is probably where non-attachment becomes like a big thing then, because a lot of people want different things. I think that's the main problem, is that all these desires then are coming into conflict with each other. So then how do you get a fully functional body that's all in unison and working together while incorporating everyone else's desires all together at the same time? Like, how do you do that?
Yeah, this was something that I'm not sure if last time when Martina was here, she mentioned something about, she said that we have to search for that unity that is behind all these patterns that each one of us ascribes to. What is it that unites us? And I'm not sure if she was thinking exactly of what you're talking about, but I also thought of that. Because I mean, in what unifies humans beyond their types is like what I refer to as the pure awareness. The fact that everyone, it connects to non-attachment in that everyone can at least mentally rise above their own desires and tendencies and try to relax a bit and understand through understanding, not be so pushy about their own ego, because they understand that it's not sustainable and it creates disharmony, and it's not often even very good for ourselves, because we end up in corners and in very narrow tunnels to get something specific that we miss out on other things. So that's yeah, so in terms of unity, then in terms of what we are trying to organize, I guess we would have to define what we want, like what is the purpose of it. Should the purpose be for something specific, like health, like so everyone is healthy? But then we have to define what health is, and this is often the mistake that societies do. I do think that people like world leaders are thinking that what we are doing is going to be best for everyone. Things like consumerism and saving the environment and various things. But those things, how do they know that? Perhaps a better approach would be to try to figure out what humanity is in a way where we don't impose our own values, but just tries to think more like organically, like if we compare humanity like an ecosystem or an organism, what do we perceive? Like, do we perceive some kind of unified orientation when you combine human beings? Perhaps an experiment could be made where you put one of each type together, and then you see what happens, and they have no idea what they are, where they are, or what they're doing, or that they are different types, and then you observe them. It would be perhaps a cruel experiment, but yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think of that?
Oh, well, I feel like this is, if it comes to health, and defining what health would be for the whole entire society, it be understanding each other's different wants or desires, I guess, and why we want them and why we want things to be that way. Like when I think of energy bias psychology in the first place, that's how I think of what it is. You're trying to get at what it is that people really, really want at the end of the day. And it's that which is causing all the problems in the world, I think, is that people's desires, what they want, is conflicting with each other. So then if we understand what it is we really want and what other people want and why they're coming into conflict with each other, then maybe we can make compromises or something with each other. There's something I can give you and something you can give me, and we can satisfy each other in a way.
I guess
Through understanding that we have these desires and we can't simply replace them with other ones or reject them or ignore them. We have to, they're like necessary in some kind of way.
But I think the problem comes with
Yes.
like culture. For example, that experiment. If people just have their natural desires, I don't think the conflicts will amass to something super destructive, because you could just live and let live. I think that's the solution. That if you just naturally express, the problem is when desires become attached to cultural achievement or like some specific goal that is artificially constructed or something like that. And I think that happens at large. I don't think you can do that just by a group of people. I think you need a large cultural apparatus that has some momentum to it, because you need to distort reality. And for you to be able to do that much, you need at least 100,000 people that all believe the same distortion or something.
Well, now I'm thinking of what Andreas said earlier about what if we took one of each type, put them in a place, and just see what happens. Well, like if these types are timeless and permanent and they're part of the human species, I figure we could probably go, depending on what knowledge we have of history, we could probably go as far back to see what these manifestations have led to over time, maybe. Or even if we look into simple primitive tribes or something like that, if we were able to pay attention, then we could see, are we able to identify even in primitive tribes different types and how they interact with each other? Because I mean, even people that are in primitive cultures are still humans, so they should still have these biases or drives or something like that that are influencing them. So
yeah, culture is a great force, because it is kind of interesting that even culture can have a unifying effect, so that people that are fundamentally different in their natures do come together and feel a sense of things like community pride or national pride and things like that. So it is very strong, this influence of culture on people and not just their nature.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Just to touch on the previous topic, I wanted to like, if I was saying like being enough, like clear enough, I was thinking that the gradient types are the most sensitive to culture, I will say, and so in that way they give that's kind of like their function to make sure that culture stays together, I will say, or at least stays in, keeps its maintains itself and is functional, I guess, because yeah. That's what I was
So
trying to
you
say.
would, in some sense, connect the function of Gratum types to the phenomena of culture. Like culture would then be like, instead of you have educators with Sapientia and providers with Morem, and then a Gratum would then be something like culture.
I guess a cultural glue, or I guess solidarity. You can also say empathy, but the problem is that not all people of Gradum like types are the most empathetic or kind people. Many of them are like more aggressive. So that's a problem I have with it. But so in the time of cultural contributions and the cultural glue, I guess, let's say, that keeps it functional and I guess together. And even as it changes over time, it will fall apart. We wouldn't really have the traditions like dance or music, entertainment that keeps the culture together in that way. Like the values are instilled through those expressions, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. But also when you have cultural revolutions, a lot of like the cancel culture and like the phenomena of mobs, that also I think is related to Gratum a lot. like
Yeah,
hysterical.
I think that that's great when it doesn't have like much of the sapientian influence, because I feel like Graytum has, especially where I live, has been given too much of an elevation to where, for example, many magnitudinamic behaviors are being labeled as toxic masculinity, and so magnitudinamics just distance themselves into their own like smaller circles of like cultural traditions and bringing back the past or something like that. And when like sapientian types are pushed to away like the wisdom, which is the novelty of ideas, and more like refinement of like essential principles is like not serving as a sort of like philosophical foundation for the gradient types cultural installation, they will try to recreate it on their own, and through a more like emotional morality that is more unstable, and that is more based on you're a bad person, I don't like you, and that's not just sustainable. So they need each other in that way, I will say.
Because the phenomena of culture is in a sense similar to the phenomena of Graytum types, in that culture is also changeable and goes through trends, just like Graytum types can adapt more easily than the other spheres.
Yeah, and that's mainly because they lack some type of. That's mainly because they lack some type of inner substance, you would say, Andreas, right? That's why it's easier for them to adapt and change and all this stuff, because
lack of a strong inner identity or self.
And I guess when you think about existence in general and how it's always changing, and that shows the lack of substance in things in general, I think that makes sense. And why it would be cool, why it's a good idea to associate chi with the Graytum types, I guess, or motion and change in general. I guess.
I was saying, I also associate culture with corpus, which is now in the Morum sphere. Why? Because I think your corpus people will get stuck into their culture, not so much in a moving way. Will get stuck to it so that they value the colors and the symbols and the badges and everything that belongs to that culture. They get very much glued to it, I think.
Yeah, well, they would be more conservative then. I mean, they are a mixture with the Graytum sphere. So, of course, there you have the connection with the culture. And then the fact that they tend to be more conservative would be because they are in the Morum sphere. So, I mean, you're not wrong there, but I don't think there's... I think that just creates a more of a nuance and complexity rather than a difference. So yeah, but let me just finish up with the functions of the Morum sphere, and then I think we'll stop soon because we've been going for a while, and we might do a part 2 of this later. But anyway, yeah, provision, basic provision, endurance, body work, concrete action, craftsmanship, such as building boats or houses and things like that, practical things that still require a certain art, confrontations, like protecting people or like warriors and things like that. Yeah, preparing food, basic necessities of life. Yeah, it's pretty much what we have talked about. But it is interesting how they can do well in like professions like education as well. They are not, I mean, they are thinking, they are reading books, but the way they assimilate information tends to be more like, I mean, they're not, I don't know. I mean, there has to be some curiosity in the way they are reading things and trying to look up things. And, a lot of Exidium types exist in like the manosphere, and trying to understand women or writing these books like how to attract women and how to deal with women. I mean, there's the curiosity is related to their desires, but still there is something of an intellectual tendency even in Exidium, even if it's not the same flavor as the Sapientium types.
Would you say that programming is something that Exidium people tend to do?
What did you say?
programming and coding and stuff like that?
Not really.
No, I don't really think of that either.
I think that's magnitude in them, like from what I've seen. Like I think, yeah, as in they isolate themselves and just focus on coding. I've seen that in magnitude in them. Yeah, which has similar tendencies in some ways.
I can imagine some urbanums doing that as well, maybe.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure my uncle's an Exidium type, and he's definitely more of like a, I don't know, it may come with older age, but I know back then in his past, he was like part of a gang and stuff like that, and he was more like violent and like ruthless sort of towards people, and he even created his own band, and he was a drummer in his band, and he enjoyed just drumming and stuff, and he liked hard music and hard and stuff like that. He enjoyed I think the idea of just being a hard type of person, like a bad boy kind of thing. But then as he's gotten older, he's gotten more, he hasn't gotten like softer. He's still somewhat will insult you and make fun of you and like make fun of other people and stuff and kind of be more rough. But he's got this more intellectual sort of side where like he's always been interested in fixing things since he was a kid. He's always been like fixing radios and pinball machines and stuff like that and putting stuff together, and he's got like a huge radio collection and fixes all kinds of stuff, which I think is really cool. And he's also somewhat engaged with like a community where he talks to people on radios and stuff like that. He's even been on a YouTube channel where he talked to someone through a radio and he showed me and he thought it was really cool. And like he even does his own research and stuff like that, and he's yeah, it's just interesting. So even for an Exidium type, they can still have this sort of curiosity and wanting to learn. But I don't know. I think it depends. It's because I've seen other Exidium types that don't at all care much about researching or looking for information or fixing things or anything like that. So
yeah, I think that there's sorry, yeah. So there's like this a little bit controversial aspect about the model in the sense that some types are masculine and some types are feminine. But I've noticed that with the exception of Misericordem, like all the feminine types tend to sometimes get stuck in some tradition or frivolity that prevents them from focusing on ideas, I guess. I think Exidium types can focus on like ideas in the same way that Sapientian types do, but they are grounded and they are not escapistic, I guess is the difference. But they don't get stuck in the same frivolities or cultural rigidity that the feminine types tend to get stuck in. That I guess prevents that from happening. Because I feel like it's not that they don't care at all. I think everyone cares about like exploring ideas or learning things. It's more so that they can't really detach from what's considered normal or what's considered like I guess acceptable or not acceptable in the way in which they see thinking. Yeah.
One thing I thought was interesting about Morum types was how common corpus is, like out in the world, I guess, and doing things. Like especially where I work a lot, I see a lot of corpus types. So I definitely think corpus is like a common sort of worker kind of person who's always engaged with society, but not in a enthusiastic kind of way. It's more of a routine, hardworking kind of way, but not like rebelling or anything like that or something. But I thought that was interesting because
on TV much. They are not so much into entertainment and like art and those kinds of things.
Well, I guess having much attention in general. It's just simple, like routine work living kind of style, and then maybe some like social community or getting to know people around them, maybe. But that's it, I would think. But you were talking about how you thought. I remember it was in an older video, but you were talking about how you think corpus is a common type, like a very visible sort of type you can see. And I definitely think corpus is like a visible type that you can see every day, like just everywhere. There's always a corpus type.
Yeah.
No, I will agree with that, because if you go to work, if you see people fixing roads,
Well, you can just tell by the way they are, the way they like appear and everything. It's like, yeah,
and the way
that's
they're dressed,
focus right
of
there. Like
course.
you just know, like
you kind of just
you just
know.
spot it so easily.
Yeah.
I feel like all the other types are very hard to sort of get or to grasp, harder to identify, except for libidinum. I think libidinum is also easy. Like you can tell when you see a libidinum type, but when it comes to all the other types, I feel like they're very challenging to spot.
I think it's easier to recognize.
You can narrow it down for sure, like, but sometimes that urbanum fiducium, that especially bothering the configuration, you kind of don't really know unless you really know the person. Like it's happened to me like sometimes. So yeah, but you can narrow it down usually. Like abstractum, for example, is rather obvious that it's in a configuration to me, like because there is like that reduction in like enthusiasm, more of like a natural introversion that doesn't come from a place of anxiety or shyness. Yeah, like that's kind of how I can recognize that abstractum is there.
I've definitely noticed where I work I've noticed a few abstractum types, I think, and they're very, very quiet and quick with things, I think. Very quick to just get what they need and get out, sort of. Like it's no conversation, no nothing like that. I've encountered some urbanum types. They tend to, it's definitely obvious with the smiling and then sort of like acting kind of thing going on. I don't know. It's like they're talking to you and then like just more expressive in general, more kind, more nice, and they tend to be more feminine as well. Like it's mainly females.
Yeah,
I think I've encountered some Mr. Cornum types too. Like I feel like where I work at, I feel like I'm sort of lucky because I see so many different people. So
yeah, and you're lucky that
I
you
just
don't have like asshole bosses too, because sometimes like some like Moran types, especially some meritums, can be kind of like unforgiving with like failures or mistakes. I've noticed that. And
well,
even if they don't
there's
be, yeah.
there's this
Yeah.
woman where I work who comes in sometimes and like I think she's a Meritum type, but she'll come in and she'll look around at the place and she'll go, "Really, you're working here? Like, why are you not in school yet? Why are you not in college? Like, just try it. Just go to college. Like, you'll like it. Just do it." It's like this.
Yeah,
She's even said like, "Oh, not trying to be a parent or anything, not trying to be pushy, but I mean, you should just get out of here. Like, go somewhere else. Go do something more." I don't know, that maybe has more meaning. And I'm like, yeah, that's Meritum. Like I can so tell that's that pushy sort of momish kind of thing, trying to give you advice.
Yeah.
Trying to push you.
To be honest,
and
like,
she kind of has this judgment aspect too, like, ugh, like you're like disgust
like,
kind of in this place. Like you should be working in a college or something. And then I was even talking to her about what college I want to go to. Like, oh, I should go to UWGB or something, which is like just regular. And then she was like, yeah, you should just transfer then, to a major university.
The issue with sorry to cut you there so off, like I'm trying to say is like before we're talking about like if it's possible for like all types to understand each other so that there can be that structural society where types are filling their functions without creating too much havoc. And exactly that what you're saying is the reason why I think that sometimes are just not gonna like be on board. Like to be honest, I could see an Exidium type more easily understanding, like, and just doing their own thing, not really caring, and just, okay, all right, I get my freedom, you mind your business kind of thing. But Meritum types always want to somehow intrude, especially if they have libidinum, and I just don't see how they will understand that without wanting to get people on board with their ideals. Sometimes it's, yeah.
No, I think, well, I think maybe any type can, even libidinums, through what, non-attachment,
Yeah. And I was saying meritum with libidinum, not libidinum of itself. I was saying meritum. It's to like I don't know, non-attachment. Yeah, it seems very difficult for them, more than even more than for Exidium, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, they have a role. I think even the downside also has its role in the whole ecosystem, because of course once something works and it's actually beneficial for all of us, then you need somebody who's going to carry it, and be enthusiastic about spreading it. Even the downside is okay. It's okay. But if we can get each and every one educated, I would say, so that we're no longer flipping and flopping.
Yeah, I mean, people can sit in your classroom, but you don't know if they're actually agreeing with you. That's kind of the problem, you know what I'm saying? I don't know what Andreas has to say about that in terms of like maybe, I mean, we're gonna end it soon, but yeah, that's a huge problem. Like for instance, that sometimes are not interested in non-attachment. So what do you do in that case?
Yeah. But what do you think of things like in Indian culture? Isn't Indian or like Buddhist countries? I mean, there might be societies where meritum types are more aware of like the cultural icons who are like non-attached Buddhist or something like that, where they have a bit more of a reverence for that kind of thing. I don't think it's impossible, but yeah, I think. I mean, it depends on how you coordinate the culture. And I was thinking of Christian's example. I mean, okay, so he works at the gas station, but maybe if society was organized adequately, they wouldn't take a type like him and put him in a gas station. So then, it would be irrelevant if, perhaps the meritum woman had a point, like he shouldn't work there.
Yeah,
but
that's
because circumstances are what they are, it becomes like this.
well, yeah,
and
because
she couldn't really articulate, a higher, like, idealistic way of changing the entire society. So she just went with her own nature,
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I think. I think she has libidinum secondary. She comes in like dressed in like sort of like fancy clothes and stuff, or like she has this style to her and like kind of like rudeness, I guess, in a way. It's I don't know if it's like a haughtiness, but it's more like it's not proper really. It's more like just
Aristocratic,
judgmental
yeah.
and like kinda. But yeah, I think that's what it was, because sometimes we talked about like what I'm interested in, what I like to do, and then like, yeah, I think she's just like, you could do so much better. Like, what are you doing? Like, so she's kind of like trying to push me to do something else, like, I guess, which I've been thinking about. I just don't
Well,
know.
okay, should we take a break here and perhaps continue at a later date? I do have a lot. We haven't really gotten into the 9 primary types, and they are.
Okay, so wait, so we'll take a break, but we're gonna continue today or like another day?
No, not today. At a later date.
Okay, a later date. Okay.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
do you
that's cool.
guys wanna
I
say?
kind of like how we got all the main 3 categories, and we sort of opened up about describing what we think they are and how they, because we sort of did describe some of the types, but we didn't go really into depth about each one, I guess. We were kind of like just explaining the spheres, and we were even talking a little bit about how they could be structured, I guess, but it's like it wasn't, I don't know. We were getting a lot of stuff out, I guess, so.
Yeah, it's a big topic, and I also imagine that perhaps in the future we might return to this topic and see if we can think of have a new perception of things with even more experience. I don't know. But yeah, I want to thank you all for participating today, and I hope to see you next time when we continue.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Ciao.